So my name's Liz Todd. I'm Professor of Education and Inclusion at Newcastle University, and I'm the co-director of the Voices Project with Luke Bramall from Children North East. And I'm here with three of my colleagues on the project, all three people from Children North East. And in this podcast on the Voices Project, we want to tell you as much as we can at the moment, which is pretty much most of it, of everything that's happened on the project, our intentions, our findings, and the kind of impact that we've had so far. Voices is a project that has been taken over 1.5 years, 18 months. And the aim of the project has been to listen to over 1,500 children and young people in the whole of the North East, with the intention of hearing aspects of children's lives in the pandemic and anything that children and young people want to tell us about their lives, but to have an impact, to make sure we hear from young people, hear their voices, and make sure that we work with young people to then make some change happen, to work with those young people and take those ideas to different stakeholders and lead to some changes. And the thinking behind this project was that we knew that as soon as the pandemic hit us, we knew that things were going to be pretty hard for a lot of us. We didn't know what was going to happen, and we in some ways still don't know, but certainly at the start, we had no idea how things were going to unfold, how long the lockdowns were going to happen for, not going to school, how long was that going to happen, or what the effect on any of us is going to be, the health effect or the mental health effect or any of this. And we could also sense and see that organisations were starting to take actions for young people and children, but we weren't too sure that they would take actions with the information of what the young people thought. And there's something not right there if you're rushing into some kind of action and rushing into to do things, make provisions happen, whether it's for people's mental health, whether it's for people's employment needs, but without a full picture. And we also thought it's quite hard for that picture to be made clear to everyone because it's a pandemic and how do you listen to people? So we thought one thing that we can do in the pandemic is get together and we can actually use our research skills working together to find out what young people are thinking and feeling and try and get that information to the stakeholders and see what changes need to happen.
So, Liz, what really interests me is how we went from the idea of the changes and the impact and informing organisations through the voice of young people, how we went from that idea to the start of the project. How did the project start? How did it all come about?
Well, it's a good question. So what happened first was, when lockdown first happened, all of us went into practical mode. And, around the country and certainly in the North East, there were all the different mutual aid societies and people doing what they could to help neighbours. And Children North East, so the organisation that you guys work for, was the practical thing that you were doing was putting these resource packs together and getting those into families that needed them. So that's resource packs, mostly with things for young children to do, whether it's things for learning, not so much tablets and stuff, but pens and paper and other and games and things to play with. And we went into action mode as well, trying to mobilise our resources to try and put things into the packs. So I was going around people in the university and trying to get as many resources as I could and take them around to Children North East. So it was very practical. And as the practical aspect sort of receded, or didn't necessarily recede, but it got into a momentum and it was happening, we started to think, well, what else can we do? Because we're researchers, is there anything that our research can add to this? And first of all, we thought of listening to parents and families, and we did do some actions to try and do that. It was a complete failure. And, it just did not work because, to try to get to families through the main way we do that was through schools, and schools did not need us as researchers coming to them and annoying them by saying, can we speak to your families? Because they needed to find out how their own families were and bring the vulnerable children of vulnerable families into schools. So they didn't need us to do that. So we particularly wanted to reach children and young people who are living in the more straitened circumstances. We wanted to listen to everybody, so the whole range of young people, but we particularly wanted to listen to economically disadvantaged children because we knew that the pandemic was having effect on families' income quite severely. And so we wanted to see what that was doing and what their needs were and make those needs much more clear and to everybody. So what we just started to do, because I've got a long-term relationship with Children North East through poverty proofing, which is another big area of work that Children North East does. And we've researched that area for a long time with Luke Bramhall, who's the co-director of the project with me. And Luke and I and some of you and other people in Children North East and people in Newcastle University, we just started meeting on a Friday morning, weekly, just an hour, talking about, well, what can we do as researchers? And out of those meetings, this project grew.
Great. Okay. So, Gwen, what I'm interested in is you were involved in the project from the very beginning. So could you tell us a little bit about, so what did you do to get children and young people start talking about the pandemic when it had only been going on for about 5 or 6 months?
Yeah, I think it's right what you're saying, Suzanne. It was a really difficult time. So I was brought into the project around September 2020. Following the first lockdown, pupils had just started returning to the classroom. We knew from the meetings that we'd started having that we needed to get out there and collect that voice from the young people. But the question was, how were we going to do that in logistic terms? Because it was a bit of a difficult situation. Schools at the time had a massive workload. They had a massive mountain to climb. They were dealing with a lot of issues when pupils were returning to the classroom, everything from learning loss to issues to do with children in very difficult living situations that had been compounded by the effects of lockdown and the pandemic. There was issues with staff absences. And so just the logistics of trying to, as much as schools were very interested and wanted to support the project, just the logistics of trying to get into a school to speak to young people, it did seem very, very challenging at that time. So I started looking at building those relationships with schools, but also looking at other avenues to get to the young people. So I started to get in touch with clubs and activities that were starting to run again. So I've done everything from standing in a field with children that have been playing football, following them round after cricket practice, to meeting them online. I've met a taekwondo club online. And then eventually, as we were more persistent, I think is the polite word, schools did start responding, and we started to be able to do those online groups with children, even if we couldn't physically go into schools. But it was challenging, but we got there, we managed. So what I would like to ask is, I've talked a little bit about the start of the project, but that was just a really, really small part of what we've done. And I know that from there, Liz, Suzanne, Catherine, you took this and just spread it across the region. We went region wide at that point, and you've gone on to speak to 1,150 young people. So how did you go about achieving that? It's incredible.
It was very hard, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
It was difficult, but you did an amazing job.
I think this sort of starting point, so when I came on board, and I think Suzanne, it was December 2020, and schools were starting to open up. So we were making plans with schools and making plans for January 2021 so that we would go in and start running face-to-face focus groups. Over the Christmas holidays, all of that went to pot because we went into lockdown again, and schools were closed to all but vulnerable and key worker children. So all of the plans that we had just fell away completely. Most of them, some schools said, no, right, okay, we've decided we're going to do this, so we'll do it, but we're going to do it online. So we started this whole process of a whole variety of online engagement over the next few months up until about March.
Yeah, about March. And we had every kind of scenario possible, didn't we? We had rooms of children who were facing the camera. Sometimes they couldn't face the camera when they were facing in the opposite direction. Sometimes we could only see the teacher and not the children. Sometimes the children didn't have microphones, so we're using the chat function.
So what was that like to talk to the children in the chat? And because you'd never done that before, presumably.
No, I'd never done that.
What was it like
before.
doing that? And did you feel you got, well, what was it like, first of all?
It was very different, and like, Gwen and Catherine has said, schools were really up against it. So the communication from the school perhaps wasn't quite there. They didn't tell us as researchers that the children couldn't physically speak.
Until you got there. You didn't know until you got there.
Until
you kind of came up.
Yeah.
You know,
Dialed in.
dialed in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got there.
Yeah, so we'd arrange for groups with this school over the full week. We'd plan to speak to about 75 children in the school, and they had quite a lot of children in school, vulnerable and key worker children, because they were in a sort of socially disadvantaged area, so there was a lot of children in school, and they said come in and speak to as many as possible, and that was fantastic, but didn't tell us that the children couldn't physically speak. So it was myself and Catherine who ran those groups, and we just arrived, turned up, had to talk to just speak out loud, and then give the children 5 minutes to type their answers in the chat and make notes of those as we went. So we couldn't see the children either. We could only see the teacher, because the children were all in different rooms with no cameras on. So they kind of emulated what they were already doing in classroom. So yeah, it was a totally different scenario, but we did get some sort of valuable insights from those groups. The children had more time, I think, perhaps to think about what they were going to say, and were able to express it through written word rather than having to try and speak it, which can be a bit intimidating, especially for the younger children.
So you think it was actually, because I think I've heard you say this before, you thought it was still quite a quality way of receiving children's voices, because you did get some things that you felt were fairly expressive.
Yeah, very expressive, and I think the reason being is that, as an adult who isn't that great with technology, I thought that it was going to be really uncomfortable for the children to communicate like that, and I thought they were going to be sort of out of the comfort zone, but actually it's much more normal for children to communicate like that now, because that's how they speak with each other, and that's how they were already learning in school. So I think it was, although it was unexpected, and innovative, really on the spot innovative, but it actually gave us a lot of insight from the children, and it was just a different way of doing it. So we just had to be responsive to the situation we were in, and we weren't always prepared for it, were we?
No. But I think the young people were in a far better situation, because it was their day in, day out, wasn't it? They were doing online schooling, they were used to it, and we had to do it for a small amount of time, but actually the teachers were having to do it every day, and the real challenges that came out of that. It was quite interesting to move from that, doing everything online. And I can remember round about March doing the first face-to-face focus group, which was really quite exciting, but also quite scary at the same time, because we were going through the same thing. We were living with the pandemic and all of the challenges and the fear of catching things, and should you be wearing masks? I think at that stage, I'm not sure we were told to wear masks, because the government guidance changed. And so, we saw that reflected very much in what young people were saying and how they were responding it. And like Liz said, this sort of government messages that were coming out. But it was really interesting how that changed. And as we moved from purely online to doing things face to face, we looked at the questions and we adapted them slightly, because it didn't feel as relevant. So we were able to respond. And that was one of the great things about this project, that we could respond to changing circumstances. And we also took note of external context. One group I remember talking to when it was snowing in February, and so they were feeling even more claustrophobic than they would normally be feeling when they were talking about things like, at one stage there was an ongoing conversation about catch-up summer schools, and there was quite a lot of pushback from that. We don't want to have to come in during the summer to come and catch up on learning. So, the conversations were different depending on what was happening in the national picture.
Actually, I'm realising we haven't actually said what questions we asked. Could one of you just summarise how you got started and how you kind of progressed to focus group? Because that would be interesting for people to hear.
Well, I think Gwen started the question, so you came up with the sort of bare bones of them, didn't you?
Yeah, it was just a skeleton, really, because I think what we've done with this project that for me is so wonderful and so important, as Catherine and Suzanne have said, it's this element of responsiveness. So we've responded to the situation, we've responded to the change in political climate, and of course when we're with children we respond to their voice and how the group's going. So although we did set off with a skeleton set of questions, I'm just sort of very keen on the idea that we always saw this as a very child-led activity, and the groups always had the freedom to respond to us and talk about how they were feeling at the time and what was important to them at the time, because of course that was the whole reason that we were there, wasn't it? The voice of the child.
How did you get started in terms of what was your first question with the group?
The first questions that we looked at was to do with how they'd felt in lockdown. So what was good about lockdown, what was bad about lockdown, and because at that time it was the start of the new academic year, around September, October 2020, it was a little bit of reflection about how things have changed now, the idea of sort of going back into the world, and there was lots of discussions about the new normal, whatever that is. We're still talking about it now. So it was what has happened in lockdown, a little bit about how they'd felt about learning at home, a little bit about how they'd felt about the changes in their family circumstances. Sort of, for example, were they affected by their parents having more time with them, or were they the children of key workers that felt that they'd seen their parents less? So it was just really those sort of key elements that started out as the sort of skeleton questions. But I think we always only ever used those as an outline, really, didn't we? It was all very much child-led once we were working with the groups themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then you had some topic areas, didn't you, that you would go into in addition to what Gwen said? Is that right?
So when we came back to look at the questions again, because things had changed so quickly, we'd been in and out of lockdown, periods of isolation, and some children were back in school, so we had to go back to the questions and look at them again to see if they were still relevant. And at first you were asking about lockdown, but we were coming out of it, so we changed the question slightly, but we always had the same approach that these are just guide questions, and sometimes the children wouldn't be interested in a question, so we would spend a very short period of time on that, and then sometimes they would just elaborate on something else, so we would just give them the time to do that, really. So we didn't ask each group each question, we just sort of and the first question that we asked was always very open of how are you feeling now, what's been important to you, and the things that they flagged at the beginning tended to be the things that we would then just spend all of the time talking about during the group itself, so it kind of gave us a bit of a guide of what they were interested in. And the questions just evolved from there, and we also wanted to try and move the conversation to what was going to happen after the pandemic. So we were asking questions about what they would like to change. This is a perfect opportunity in time to change things. So what would you like to change? But we also wanted to ask them, what do you want to stay the same? Because there were some positive things that came out of the pandemic that children told us, that they were really enjoying spending more time with their family and enjoying their relationships over going out and spending money and things like that. So we asked them what they wanted to stay the same, and what was important to them as well. We really wanted to get a sense of how things were changing over time, what was important to children, and how they were feeling about their future as well, and things like that. So that's kind of how we approached it. So we were responsive to the changing world. We were responsive to the children themselves and the things that they wanted to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, I think broadly the areas that we looked at were around, how it was at home. Were there new things that they had taken up? Because quite a few of them talked about new hobbies, learning, different languages or instruments or whatever, but also the fact that they'd had to stop doing so many things. So a lot of clubs and activities went online. So we got an idea as to how that had changed for them. We talked about their online time, and that was quite interesting, and particularly in retrospect, because none of these things have been static. They've all changed as things have gone along. So we talked about digital stuff. Some of them were spending huge amounts of time online. Some of them saw it as being quite a negative thing, and so that was really interesting to get the real sort of perspective on that. We talked about mental health and physical health and how that had changed, and there was some, again, interesting things came out of that. Transport, that was a key area as well. Education. So those were the sort of, the broad areas that we were talking about. But then also, like Gwen said, how are you doing? What's life like at the moment? What's important to you? What do you want to change? What's going to happen next? So there were lots of different things that came out of that. And some of those ideas we've picked up in the sort of longitudinal groups, what we're calling the longitudinal groups, which really, what does it mean?
It means continuing, seeing them again, maybe getting a bit more depth, building a relationship, that type of thing, isn't it?
So we've carried on talking to some groups up until now, and so we've not finished those conversations yet. So some of them, so I think one of your groups you spoke to in September 2020 and you're speaking to again now.
Yeah, I'm still going back there now. So I've got a nice mixed Key Stage 2 group that I've got a good relationship with, and they're telling me lots of very interesting things. So,
and we've got other groups that we've developed comics with. There's some of the groups that we've been doing around some of the themes as well, particularly the employment theme, which I think you've been really involved in, haven't you, Suzanne?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we've there were a lot of groups that said that employment was important to them, particularly college age young people, or those coming to the point where employment was going to be an important thing. But there was one particular group that were very articulate about it and had some real concerns they wanted to express. And because it was such an important thing, we went back to that group a number of times over the course of a few months, just to revisit the things they'd said, see if they changed, and to just really get a really deep feeling of what life was like for them in terms of their employment opportunities and how things were progressing for them. And each time they really raised the same concerns and the things that the barriers they were facing in looking for employment. So some of them in this group were actually in employment, and they were really experiencing feeling unsafe at work. They worked in retail, which many young people typically do. So they were very face-to-face, and this was at a time when, at the height of the pandemic, where they were really worried about their safety, and that maybe employers weren't prioritising young people's safety in the workplace and really expecting them to put themselves at risk. They also talked about, when looking for employment, how confusing it was for them. It wasn't always clear whether they were expected to have experience in the job adverts, and when experience was required, what they were saying was, how can we possibly get that? We've spent the last year and a half, depending on at what point we were talking to them, in national lockdown, and I'm only 17 years old. How could I have possibly got experience during that time? So there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be ahead of me of the queue, really, in employment. And it wasn't just leaving school or leaving college and gaining full-time employment. It was also if they wanted to go in higher education and have part-time employment to support their finances. That was difficult. And just the normal transition that young people face, which can be difficult at the best of times, became really, really, really difficult. So, we kind of brought those together into 4 big asks that the young people had, and we got them together with a group of employers, and we asked the employers what they were going to do about these asks, and that is an ongoing process. It's something that, because it still affects young people now, we're still working on it. It's still a very integral part of the Voices project.
Yeah, we've met with the North East Chamber of Commerce. They've been very helpful. The LEP, the North of Tyne Authority, people from the North of Tyne Authority, and several employers. and we've got plans to go to
The TUC.
TUC. We're working with the TUC, and there's another organisation we're working with.
The group originally came from NCS, the National
Of course,
Citizen Service.
Yes.
So we're still working with that organisation, and so our young people are going to be meeting with the TUC, and they're also going to be presenting the Voices project to the organisation they were originally involved in, the NCS. So our young people have had the opportunity to express not just their feelings about employment, but also what they've gained out of being involved in the Voices project. We've written a blog, which the young people have contributed to, and will be shared on our website and social media. And the young people are going to be presenting their involvement and their ideas to stakeholders and wider groups.
And I think we're hoping that this might end up being part of a charter for youth employment.
Yes.
That we might work with the TUC on, or the Chamber of Commerce, or other organisations. But that's ongoing, and we'll see what happens to that.
Yes.
And there's another aspect to Voices that we haven't spoken about, and that is that we sent out packs in the original packs that we did that started off the Voices project before we started off as talking together before we actually had the Voices project. We then thought of putting into those packs some drawing, the possibility of actually children doing a drawing or some writing, and not having to be part of a focus group. And we originally thought that if they did a drawing and then they tell us whether they wanted to speak to us, and we thought we'd get our focus groups like that. That didn't happen. However, we did send these 3 pieces of paper with, can you tell us, please draw or write, what's been difficult recently, what's been good, and what's important to you now. And we got some absolutely fantastic pictures back. We sent out, I think, about 3,100 packs to different organisations, to about 15 plus organisations. Tons and tons of packs that were sent out. And it was Janice in Children North East who did that work, and amazing work that she did. And we got about 900 of them back. And the pictures, you can look at the pictures in our big report, and hopefully we'll be able to put some of the pictures on this video, on this podcast is the word I'm looking for. Yes. And because they are incredible, absolutely incredible. And they have helped us to think about the strength of people's views and feelings. There were so many pictures about relationships and not seeing people or missing people, or how lovely it was to see people again. I mean, that was just such a massively strong theme. How much they loved playing on their devices, it was another really strong theme. But not liking school. But I mean, we didn't see many pictures of not liking school online. But there was 1 or 2. But it was an awful lot of the good things about playing online and playing with other people. There's a lot of socialising. But it really did help us understand what children and young people feel and think, because the pictures also had words, and so it was very clear what children were saying. We didn't have to do a lot of interpreting. It was really, really good. Transport was a theme that was a surprise. I don't know if it was a surprise to you, but it was certainly a surprise to me that was almost the first theme that was yes, children were saying things about what they felt about learning, about not seeing people. But there was always mixed views of each of these other themes. I mean, very strong mixed views. But transport in the kind of the second lockdown, when you did all those online focus groups, and we were hearing, it was the only theme that we had a universally negative view about transport, about one thing.
Public transport.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And that children felt nervous, scared about travelling on buses. They were worried about not getting onto the buses because they didn't have their masks. They were worried about other people not wearing masks and them catching COVID and taking it back to their families. They're worried about missing a bus and there not being a next one. And there was, a high level of anxiety, but a universal view. And what we did, and Suzanne played along, and Catherine played a big role in this, in talking to the young people. We got from young people we worked with young people, with a particular group of young people, to find out what they wanted to say to the transport companies. And then we went to the transport companies and said, will you come and talk to young people? Now, I've never done that before. I've never contacted the Nexus and the local bus companies to see if they talked to a university professor and some researchers. But amazingly, they did, and they wanted to. In some ways, not surprising, because there was nobody on the buses at the moment at that time, and you might imagine that buses and the metro would be kind of like anything we can do to get people back on them. I'm not cynical at all, actually, about it. That's not what I'm saying. I was actually very delighted, and I thought it was a fantastic meeting that we had with the bus company people, Nexus, and the young people. It was one of the meetings when young people have spoken to stakeholders and the stakeholders have spoken back, where we just felt there was that conversation. They were actually listening to each other in a really good way. So yes, of course, the bus companies needed people in, and it was not surprising they came. It was a bit of a surprise for me because I've never spoken to them. It was just a joy that we had that conversation that seemed to be so fruitful and constructive, and has led to one or two different things. For example, one of the bus companies offered some placements, some work placements, and I think schools have taken that up, and that's been offered and been very generous.
But I think that's one of the things that has set this project apart, isn't it? It's the idea of impact and moving things forward. We're not just visiting these young people in the capacity of researchers. We're wanting to do so much more with the project, and we've got so much impact and so much evidence that the young people have had that positive involvement, that you were not just saying we are going to listen to you, we're actually affecting change as a result of what we've done.
And I think it was really interesting. I mean, I think Suzanne and I, during that period from January to March 2021, we were listening to all of the things that were being said, and it continued after that. And it was only during the summer that we came and we reflected back on that. And reading through the transcripts, there was a lot of unhappiness and misery, and it was really striking, just the volume.
And boredom or not?
Boredom,
Not so
yes.
Boredom?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Lots of boredom.
And is this going to finish? Is this ever going to end?
Yeah, hopelessness, just,
A whole range of feelings that young people had, and that just the amount of it was quite staggering. I find it really hard to read through all of that,
Yes,
even
me
though
too.
it was our lived experience as well, wasn't it? We were all going through it, but just hearing just the impact that it had had on so many of them, and actually talking to the groups that we're still working with, that hasn't gone away. There have been some changes in behaviour which are probably still there. There is still quite a strong legacy from the pandemic and how it's affected them, and how they'll continue into adulthood, really.
I just hope people have a chance to talk about this. Young people have a chance to keep talking about it and processing it.
Yes, yeah.
One thing that is interesting me, and maybe you can answer this question, is when you were doing the focus groups, you always had another adult there, whether it's an online focus group or in-person one. And in the third phase, when things had opened up and all the schools were back, I know that there was a lot more. Then it was almost all in-person focus groups. And you had a teacher there quite often, I think, or a youth worker. Can you give any examples of the kind of impact on the youth worker of hearing what young people had to say? Was there any surprise, or were they happy to hear? What kind of reactions did you get?
I think for the youth workers and youth groups, maybe not so much, because I think they had probably quite a close relationship with their young people anyway. But in schools, definitely teachers were. It was just seeing their children or their young people in a completely different light. At the end of the groups, more often than not, they would say, "I've never saw them like this before." Sort of the whole who they are as a young person. And I think it definitely made them think about who their pupils were in their school and what they were experiencing outside of school as well. Most definitely. And I think it also helped some of the schools be more responsive to the needs of the children. that, you know, there was obviously that pressure to, once they were back in school, to do catch up and make sure that they hadn't missed any of their learning. And what I hope, and the sense that I did get from the conversations that I had with the schools, was that they took a little bit of a step back and realised that there was probably more they needed to do to help their children heal from what they'd experienced and ease them back into normality, really, or something that was resembling normality. And
that's really interesting what you're saying, because of course we know, and you know, several of us here have been teachers, and we know what schools are like, and we know that teachers and people in schools are doing as much, you know, tons that they can to really help, as much as they possibly can to help children using their own skills and what they're doing. And so we're not saying that they're not trying, but what we're saying is that sometimes the way that you get into talking in schools, because of the pressures of the day, the pressures of the curriculum, particularly the pressures if in a pandemic when you feel people have got tons to do to catch up, those kind of pressures also mean that you don't necessarily hear in a particular way. And what I think I'm hearing from you is that the questions that we were asking, and the fact that you went in as an outsider from this big project, asking lots of children some very open questions, I think what I'm hearing is that you heard that you and the teachers heard them talk about themselves in a way that the teachers were not used to hearing them talk about themselves.
Yes. Yeah. And I think for us, we're in a unique position that we have a certain amount of freedom in that sense, because as you've said, Liz, children have a very close relationship with their school, with their teachers. And I think it's almost to a certain extent that they don't want to offend or upset, because nobody for 1 second doubts that schools aren't given 110%. But we have the freedom of coming in as an external person, as an outsider, and that does give them a sense that they can speak to us perhaps in a way that they wouldn't speak to their teacher.
Yeah.
You know, that they can say what they're not happy about. That does give them a slightly different license almost in the conversation, that they don't have to worry about causing us offence. We come in as this person that they don't know, and they do talk to us quite freely, which I think's been wonderful and incredibly helpful to us in terms of the data we've been able to collect.
I mean, I think I've been really surprised at how open young people have been, given the fact that, you know, we've gone in, as Gwen said, you know, as an outsider.
I think as well, Catherine, a lot of the earlier groups that I did, because they were outside of the school setting as well, I think that the children did have a real sense of freedom there. So there wasn't a teacher in the corner of the room. They were very blunt. They were very honest. You know, for example, what the work I did with the football club right at the beginning, there was no teacher listening to what they were saying, so they were very direct and very honest in what they were saying, and it was that freedom, wasn't it?
I think it was, and I think, I mean, you know, we weren't just talking about school, but, you know, talking in that much wider sense. I mean, you know, young people were saying that they were quite open about saying they had struggled with their mental health and that they had found it really difficult.
Yes, a lot of children said that, and there were some quite extreme circumstances that children were in.
Yes, there were. But going back to the idea that, you know, we were non-judgmental. We went in and we asked questions and we wrote down what they said, and we started off by saying, you know, that it was to be anonymous, so their names wouldn't be put next to anything, and that's continued throughout, although some of the final products might have names attached to things.
Yes, if children are giving, in the comics, if children and the schools, both the school and the children who are part of any of the comics with the comic artists, if the children give permission and the school gives permission, their names can then be attached, but it's only with lots of permissions. Yeah.
But, I mean, again, the sort of relationship between Children North East and the university don't have the names of the children or of the contacts within the schools. So we were essentially the guardians of that and the guardians of their anonymity. So that was the condition under which we spoke to them, that they could say things to us and it wouldn't be directly attributable back to them. But as you say, then there wasn't a member of staff in the room, and that, you know, like Suzanne, I had quite a few people who said to me afterwards, you know, just how moving it was. You know, I can remember one A-level geography teacher saying he was, you know, really moved by what they'd said and how they'd said it. Another teacher who really listened to what was being said and then went back and did things in the school as a result of what they were hearing, which wasn't necessarily always COVID related, but they felt able to raise issues and raise concerns that perhaps there hadn't been a space for before. And I think that's been one of the really valuable things. Continuing with the comics, then the just being able to sit and have a conversation with somebody has been really, really nice. It's quite a privileged position. We have asked some hard questions, and one group of girls did say to me at one stage, "This is therapy, isn't it?" And didn't want anything to do with it.
Well, that's good. You see, if they then said they didn't want anything, I mean, they decided, and that's fantastic, because we want to have a process where people can take part or not take part. It's really important that if they feel anything uncomfortable about it, that they didn't have to. So it's great test to me to know that they're. And I knew that, but it's I knew that we had a process. Well, you try your best with your methodologies and our ethics processes to make sure that that's the case. But,
and we did say, at the start of any conversation, that they shouldn't share things that they didn't feel comfortable sharing within the group, and if they didn't want to answer questions, they didn't have to. So there was always that sort of opt out.
Yes, our ethical whole process has been really, really. There's been, in fact, the whole. I think we as a team, as the two organisations together, have had meetings all the way through on a Friday morning for an hour and a half, and it's all been about how we're doing, what we're doing. But in the kind of other flip side of that is it's all about the ethics, isn't it? It's all about how are we being careful about young people, being safe and careful about ourselves, and that's all been taking that. Concerned about people's welfare and our own welfare, I think, has been the whole kind of thing, really.
I think one of the other important things to say is that we've developed some really good relationships with different organisations. The fact that we've managed, by the skin of our teeth, to reach young people in every one of the 11 or 12
yes.
local authorities. So I think Redcar and Cleveland was one of our last groups, but we've been everywhere. So we have got voice from everywhere. We've got voice from youth groups as well as primary schools, secondary schools.
That's right. It's been Northumberland, North Tyneside, South Tyneside, Newcastle, Durham, Gateshead, Hartlepool, Sunderland, Middlesbrough. Anywhere else I've left out?
I think that's all of them.
Yeah. And it has been very, very hard. And at one point, the funding body of this project, which is the ESRC, we had to go back to our university to get further funding into the ESRC to get a further time, because it was so hard, both in terms of recruitment of staff in the project, but also in terms of just recruiting the schools. I mean, it's just been a really difficult project to do. It's the only project we wanted to do in the pandemic, but it was the hardest project to do in the pandemic.
Yes, I think for every school that we managed, or every school or group we managed to have, meet with children or young people or have groups with, there'll have been 3 or 4 that we maybe had a brief conversation with and it didn't go anywhere, and about 10 or 12 that just didn't reply in the first place. Understandably, they were going through a pandemic too.
But you've done an incredible job in your persistence, your polite, calm persistence, and like every now and again going back and keeping on and hoping that people would come back to you, and quite often they have. And but it's and I think it's also been a testimony to because I've also sent out lots of emails to people I know, and Luke, the co-director, sent out emails to people he knew, and yourselves as well. And it's been a testimony to our joint sort of networking and engagement in the Northeast with all the schools that we both know, and the organisations we both know, and the people we know who then know lots of other organisations in different parts of the Northeast. And it's been like that, or we've turned up on online head teachers conferences and told them about it and said, do any of you want to take part? So we've just done everything we possibly could to be, for people to be able to take part in this project.
And it paid off in the end.
Yes, it paid off in the end.
It
yes.
did.
And there's been other nice little things like Gwen, you had one young person design a certificate.
Yes, I did. An important part of the project was to have that incentive there for young people and to thank young people for what they've done for us, because obviously without them there would be no project, would there? And when we were having our meetings, that, as Liz has said, has been so productive because we've had just a wonderful collaborative way of working, haven't we? I strongly felt that it just didn't fit with the Children North East ethos to give the job of designing certificates for children to an established graphic design company. For me, I thought it was quite important to give that experience to a young people, and because we'd built a successful relationship with a sixth form college, I went back to them and we arranged for it to be given to one of their students. So I thought that that was productive because it's part of CV building, it's part of experience. And, you know, as Suzanne's explained, for so many young people, that's been incredibly difficult in the pandemic to gain those opportunities to have experience, to help them to go on to their next steps, whatever next steps they choose. So I enjoyed doing that because I felt it was a productive thing.
And also, there's other people in part of our group that aren't with us, that aren't part of this podcast. I've mentioned Luke Bramall, who's been the co-director with me. We've also got Sarah Robson, who also works for Children North East, who's a manager who helps to manage the Children North East part of it. Janice, who I've mentioned, who has done a massive job in terms of getting the packs out and to schools and back, and the drawings back from schools. We've got Billy, who works for Children North East, and she's working on the communications and trying to get us another talk with children with Look North, we hope. If Look North watches on this, please, we'd like to be on there again. With Lindsay Short, who's the comms person at Newcastle University, and they work together and work with us in terms of how can we, you know, what kind of press releases or what kinds of formats can we try to get more publicity for the children's voices and for what needs to happen. So we're always trying to think of getting the messages out there so that people will listen to hear what children are saying and take some action. And we've had Lydia Wysocki and Lucy Tiplady, who are two colleagues of mine, fantastic researchers that I work with. And Lydia has done an amazing job over the whole project in managing everything and keeping everything together, and doing all the administration, but also all the kind of working with each of us to kind of make us sure that we're all asking the right questions and keeping us right with the methodology and ethics and lots of other things about how this project works. She's also a graphic artist and a comics person herself, and has engaged the comics artists to be part of the project. And Lucy Tiplady is a researcher who's worked with Suzanne and Catherine on the having an impact aspect of things. So when we've gone to do the work with the transport providers or with the employers, Lucy's been the person that's has stepped in at that point to think about how we're going to having an impact. We have an advisory board, so we have a big advisory board in terms of which has got people at national level and regional level. It includes people from the Child Poverty Action Group, from the North East Child Poverty Commission, and from a range of other organisations across the North East as well. And those are people that are advising us and helping us to think through how we have an action, and also taking our findings into their organisations, we hope. So there's a lot of other things that happen in this project as well. And then we also think about what we want to do next. And we would love to continue to listen to children and young people, not at this level, this pace, perhaps. But we, as Catherine, you said, it's not finished, is it?
No, we're still going on. And I think some of the relationships which we have developed, certainly from a Children North East perspective, will continue. We can see that there's legacies in certain things. So, for example, the young people who've been involved from the National Citizen Service. I mean, hopefully it's been an experience for them which might have some very clear outcomes, but also, you know, in terms of helping to develop their confidence, it's been part of their story. And that's something that I think we can be proud of. All the young people who've been involved in the comics workshops, or in any of the videos, or just sharing their voices in a whole variety of different ways. And the the longitudinal groups, all of that has had a long-term impact. And I think as well, it's also had an impact on the teachers and the youth workers and the adults who've heard what we've been able to say. I think one of the things you talked about, the advisory group, when we fed back to the advisory group, I mean, they're all people too, with families and with children. And when we've talked about the experiences of children, they can relate to that. They say, yes, their children have been going through that. So it's been a common experience across the board. And I think one of the things that we hopefully will be able to do is to really celebrate that wealth of information that we've got and make sure that those voices are not heard. One of the young people I spoke to, more or less as the last focus group, so one of the young people in Redcar and Cleveland who was just going to start GCSEs, he said, so he's going into year 10, he said, my last true year of education was year 7. So he had the majority of his secondary school was disrupted. That will have an impact. People who have talked to us about, again, another young person who was a strong footballer. Yeah, she'd got a scholarship to go to the States to go and study, but she'd stopped. And she'd stopped going to practice and she wasn't involved in football. That might have happened anyway. Mm-hmm. But again, young people who were looking at going on to university or who were looking at those transition points, what courses am I going to do? And have made safe choices because they've stuck with what they know rather than, perhaps going to, I don't know, a university at a different end of the country or going and looking around at different places. They've made safe choices. And so the legacy from this will go on for a long time. And I think, we, to a certain extent, we're in a position to be able to carry on saying and support other people in saying, look, this has been huge.
Yes, and the legacy, interesting you mentioned that because it makes me remember and realise to speak about the impact on university students, because I've taken some of the findings of Voices into some of my university classes. And because it's fit, I teach on social justice and on poverty and on social justice in education and get students to think through different ideas about social justice. And so the Voices project fits perfectly in that, and it's a live project for them to engage with around different ideas. And I've shown them some of the quotes and then asked them to create one-page zines from the quotes. And that's been an amazing experience because these are second and third year students, university students, who themselves have been through lockdown and last year were having to be taught. I've been doing them this year all face-to-face, which has been a joy. But they've had to experience the online teaching all the time themselves. And then they've come across these quotes from young people. And that's been amazing seeing, and I've asked them to choose one or two quotes and then in small groups to make a zine, a kind of collage zine from cutting and paste things from newspapers and magazines of what these different quotes mean to them and what they want to say to young people or what different aspects of social justice it means. And it's been amazing to see our findings amplified by students and what they've picked out. And they picked out that the thing about I might not go to university now, or not doing GCSE has been a blessing and a curse is another one that they picked out quite a lot. And the kind of a whole range of positive comments and a whole range of negative comments, the real mixture of comments, and that some of them made collages of all kinds of different feelings and thoughts. And that's been really enlightening. And they found it, they loved doing it. They found it fascinating doing it. In terms of quotes from young people that have really meant something to me, I just want to read 3 of them. And this is not to minimise the really real difficulty and the real, as you put it, misery and how hard it's been for people. But these show how hard it's been, but also the wisdom of young people realising what they've gone through. So these are all young people who aged between 11 and 18, but attending a college, and some of them were between the age of 16 and 18. Lockdown was a challenge, and with every challenge there comes an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do things you've never done before. And another one. I've been screaming because of how I felt, but now it's over and I survived a global pandemic. I mean, that is amazing. And then the final one. It proves that you will be able to adapt. Through the pandemic, everything changed. There were lots of changes in a short time, and it shows you can cope with all of it. I don't know who these young people are. I hope that they remember what they've said, or maybe that this brings it back to them, and they can realise that they have coped, and that could give them some encouragement at other times when they find it hard to cope. But maybe now is the time to ask each of us to speak about what this project's meant for us, and it doesn't have to be very long, but just something about kind of what's it meant really. I don't know who wants to go first, or
Yeah, I'll go first. This project has been a huge part of my life over the last couple of years. Really, really significant for a lot of reasons. I think it was a bit of a double-edged sword at times. It really helped me feel more connected with the rest of the world and what they were experiencing, so I wasn't sitting at home thinking I was the only one, which I think after months of being alone you can get to that point sometimes. I've got a teenage boy as well, so it helped me understand maybe a little bit more about what he was going through, but also having conversations about the difficult times that children and young people were going through while living through it myself. It was hard at times. It wasn't an easy thing to do, but I'm glad for it because, like I say, it did help me feel a little bit more connected with the rest of the world and what other people were experiencing, and just to be part of it, really, to meet the people that I've met, build the relationships that I've met, get the experience that I've got. I feel like I'm a better researcher, a better professional, and a better person for it, really, because I've learned so many things and I really enjoyed it, and I hope it continues.
I think I would like to echo a lot of what Suzanne said, because it's meant so much to me personally. It's been an absolutely amazing experience that's helped me professionally, helped me personally. Like Suzanne says, I've talked about some of the themes with my own children. It's been a fantastic opportunity. It's taught us about ourselves. It's taught us about new ways of working. It's taught us about what young people think. And I just feel so proud to be involved in this, because it just exists on so many levels. I know we talked about before how Voices has just grown legs of its own, hasn't it? And it doesn't just exist as this amazing time capsule, this amazing snapshot of a unique point in time. It's so much more than a standalone research project. It's something that we're pushing forward to affect this impact, to affect this change. And it's just a wonderful thing to be even able to say that you're a tiny little part of that. Is just it's a wonderful thing, and it's been a great opportunity.
Yeah. No, yes, all of those.
All of the above.
And that's right. I mean, I think one of the things that's been really interesting and useful, and certainly when we've talked about it with colleagues at Children North East, I think that's something that, we will try to have more of, the fact that we've worked collaboratively. So there's been people in the team from Children North East side who've come and gone for a whole variety of different reasons. But the fact that we've worked together, that we've taken ownership of our side of things, of the research side, and been able to talk, all right, okay, we need to change the questions now. We need to do this. This is what we think is going to work there. And that I think we've all said that we felt as though we were on an equal footing with the university team. I'm not from an academic background; other people are, but it hasn't felt as if there's been a disparity there. It's felt as if we've got ownership and that we're respected for our.
Yeah, it's been an amazing working relationship that's been full of trust and respect. And we've learnt so much from each other. It's been fantastic.
Yeah. But we've also been able to talk about the things that
have not gone well.
not gone quite as well. which is always important because you know that is part of trust.
Yeah.
And again, that will go into our learning for sort of future collaborations. And I mean, it's not something we do easily, is it? You know, particularly when you.
But it has felt easy in voices, hasn't it? You know, if something's not worked or it hasn't gone the way you thought you've done, or you've hit sort of a stumbling block, having that, in essence, that peer supervision, isn't it? To be able to talk about, you know, I tried this and it didn't work. What does everybody think? And just that great sense of support and collaboration has been fantastic.
I think that's how we've had as many opportunities as we've had, because we met so regularly, and we would come to the meeting and we'd say, I'm finding this difficult, and then you would probably be finding the same thing difficult, and we'd find a different way to do it. Or there would always be, you know, as a wider group, we would just come up with solutions together.
I mean, I think that first. I mean, I know one of my first meetings was in December, whenever it was, December 19. Sort of a few meetings then, and you know, we were all raring to go. Yes, we've got all these things set up, and then it just disappeared. It just all fell apart.
January 5th or something.
It was that was just really bizarre. And I can remember through most of the next few months just thinking, because at that stage it was 500 young people we were meant to be talking to, just thinking 500. How are we going to speak to 500?
We can't even speak to 5. Yeah.
Yes. I remember,
how is this going to work?
I remember thinking, I just need to get my first group booked in. I just need to have an actual session.
Speak to somebody.
I'm just sending a lot of emails out at the moment.
And it's been absolutely fascinating and a real privilege to be part of this and to manage it. Really, it's been wonderful. It's meant so many different things to me. It's been a lot personally, because obviously I've been going through it all as well myself, and we've all been through the pandemic. And I remember right at the very beginning, instead of being in my study, which is at the back of the house, just sitting in the living room, because at least if I worked in the living room, I could see people outside the door, outside the house, walking by. I mean, I live with my partner, and I love my partner. He's fantastic, but I needed to see those other people, that there was a world out there, you know. And it's been able to be a feeling of connected to us all working together to try and do something that's helpful. You know, I'm not a brain surgeon, I'm not a COVID doctor. But I'm a researcher, and you know, and it's really important to me to work collaboratively. Really, really, totally what I want to do. So to be able to try to, and that was a challenge, to try to create at the beginning that team where we really did start to work together, and we did respect each other, and it's like you don't know how. It's like, okay, we're all flat on this screen in these little boxes in this Zoom thing. How on earth are we gonna get to know each other enough to know how to do this? And I didn't really know what we'd become. I got no idea about, you know, when you start off, you don't know, do you? But I think every time we've met, we've chatted like personally first. We've just had a chat and what you've been doing and kids and and got to know each other a bit, and then we get into the business and stuff. And we've had the most detailed conversations about methods that I've ever had in any project. Partly because we're different organisations, and you have to, because I don't know how you think you're going to do a focus group. I don't know what you think. I don't know you. So we've had to get into that detail that I'd probably make assumptions if it's just me working with Lydia and Lucy, because we've done this sort of stuff more often. So because we couldn't make those assumptions, you had to have those conversations, because there's a lot of us, we had to have those conversations. And also, because I'm managing the project and needed to know we had the data, this thing, you know, these bits of paper at the end to do the reports, I had to know that I would be able to look at stuff at the end, you know, so we had to talk all this through. The other thing is it's taught me so much about listening. I mean, I've done tons of things around Youth Voice and listening. I'm a member of Citizens UK, and with the university is a signed up member to Citizens UK, and so where listening is absolutely essential. So listening is very important, but I've still learned even more about it through this, and the importance of it. When you get it right, it's very hard to do that. In some ways it isn't. It's just like you have to just be open and listen. But anyway, and what else? The other thing about this, I've never been in a project where we keep having new ideas and then we do them that weren't part of our original plan. I mean, it's like
we're responsive.
We have to actually not meet together, because every time and it keeps happening. I met with Luke this week, And we got this idea of doing a joint together little reading group where we'd all read things together, sort of either academic things, policy things, and we'd get, we'd actually sort of be able to talk about ideas and things. So the problem is, just the minute you get any of us together, there's another thing. Oh yeah, let's go. That's how the transport thing came, wasn't it?
It
We
was,
just talked and we just get these new ideas and we just go off and do them. So that's also been the delight, is having a group of as diverse as this, with I think the trusts that we've got, that we can just innovate the whole time. We've just gone off and done stuff. And we have had more impact than any other project I've had as well. We've had more impact within the project. I don't think you normally expect to have impact in a project of 18 months within that 18 months project, or even within the first few months, which is what we had. So that's also been, quite amazing, really. And just getting to know people in the relationships has been great. We're all so different, and it's great. And it hasn't. Sometimes we have had disagreements. We've known about them. I've sort of thought, hold on a minute, so and so's not speaking about that, or they've just said that, or this hasn't happened. Okay, right. Well, I better have a conversation with Luke separately, and then I'll see whether they can have a conversation with each other, and I'll also send an email to see if they just want to, and it's all fine. And it's always fine. Trying to get an atmosphere where it's always fine to say whatever you like. You might not want to say it in our little boxes, but you need to say it somewhere so that it can rattle through and we can sort it out. And we've had things we've had to iron out,
Yeah. And most of them have, not if everything worked out perfectly, then...
well, we wouldn't be human beings, would we?
No, we wouldn't.
Yeah.
We wouldn't. So, I think that there are things, and I think there's been a lot of learning
absolutely.
around how it
Absolutely.
is that you can work together and
Yes,
share
absolutely.
things. And I think there is also, and I think I'm quite guilty of this, just too many ideas.
Yeah.
And just getting
You have to rein it
over-ambitious
in.
and then thinking, did we say we were going to do that?
But we've also been quite good in meetings at having, because we've rotated the chairing of each of
Yes.
our little Zoom
Yeah.
meetings,
Yeah.
and around us, and some of us are pretty good at cutting through the rubbish and saying, no, we're just going to do this, and we've got to achieve this by this, or Lucy can only come to this meeting for this half hour, so we've got to do the impact stuff when she comes, and that, So I think some of us have,
Yes,
and I
we
think
have.
you're quite
Yeah.
good at making us keep on task.
Yeah.
And,
I like an agenda.
yes. So I think we're coming to the end of our podcast. We've I hope we've said everything we want to say. I don't know if there's anything you're thinking of that you haven't said that you'd like to say. Now is the time. My main thing to leave this at the end of this podcast is my gratitude to all the people who've taken part, to the young people particularly, but to all the people around them that's helped to make sure that the packs got to us, or the focus groups took part, whether it's in a youth organisation or a school. And massive gratitude to our two organisations that we've been able to work together like this. And we still have some more time to go. We haven't finished the project. We're still going to make sure we have an impact in various areas. And we didn't talk about the Sunderland software, did we?
So one of the impacts has been with working Sunderland Software City, which is a technology organisation looking to promote digital skills, working with a secondary school to look at young people's attitudes towards the amount of time they spent online. I think it was fairly overwhelming that, when we talked to young people about the amount of time they spent online, and they would talk about it in relatively negative terms. And I think that was partly because they were talking about it and they felt as though adults...
Putting it to adults, and
Yes.
they know that adults are always telling them to do less, aren't they?
Yeah. So, we went in and
Because do you
we've had a
think
conversation
in the
with them.
conversations with young people about the digital that really they've mostly been very happy that they've had much more time, or not?
It depends what they're doing. Online schooling, no.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Universally
But
hated that.
online, all the gaming,
online doing other
TikTok,
things.
and social media, YouTube, all the rest of it.
So I think there's been different attitudes, as in all of them. There's been a whole range of attitudes. I mean, some have said it makes me angry, and that my family say, you can't do it because it's just making you too angry. Some have said they've stayed up all night gaming and that's not contributed to their good mental health or physical health. So there's been a whole variety of things that they have talked about, just getting bored talking to people online. They started off texting or, WhatsApping or whatever, and they've just not got anything to say. So they've stopped
So
doing
those
that.
are the negatives. Have they been mostly negative or have they had positives?
So when we had the workshop with the secondary school, when we asked how they felt about it, they were just so positive.
What did they say? What did they
What
did they say that
they
online
said
does?
it was so freeing. They felt really relaxed. It was their just downtime. They really enjoyed just being able to be online, and that it helped them go to a different place and relax. So that was in contrast to what it was that we'd been hearing to a certain extent. And it just shows that, you have different conversations at different times and with different groups of people, and you hear slightly different variations on things. Hopefully what's going to happen. So one of our challenges was we now have a generation of young people who have got more digital skills than ever before. We also have a generation of adults who've got more digital skills. But it's still one of the biggest growing sectors of the economy. Sunderland Software City are about promoting digital skills and the technology and digital sector as employment. And in the North East, it's particularly important. And so the workshop was about young people being involved in developing some materials which Sunderland Software City will use in other schools in their work, and hopefully as well develop a the trainer package, which will help teachers to have a different understanding of digital skills and where young people are at with that.
So is that to help both young people and their teachers or youth leaders to understand the importance of the skills they've got and to see them in a positive light and to see them as something that can possibly help them in all kinds of jobs in the future?
Yes, so making the connection between the digital skills they have and the careers that they might want to go into. So, it's not just about them relaxing. It's also about them being able
relaxing
to earn
or annoying their parents.
But, being able to earn money.
Yeah.
In hopefully a relatively well-paid job and help, the North East become more digitally advanced.
Yep. So the final thing is just to say thank you everybody for contributing to the project, and thank you guys for being part here for the podcast.
Thank you.